Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's coming up to midday here. Let's take a look at Big Ben. It can only mean one thing. Prime Minister's Questions is back. And not only that, so is Little Kunsberg. We know he's going to crowdsource from emails again, but maybe do his own follow-ups. Yep. But he gets to choose the subjects he crowdsources from. Do we know what he's going to go for?
We don't. I think he is not going to go on the row over the Saudi prison contracts. Now, he made a big play of that in his first Prime Minister's Questions, but the understanding is, and of course this might change, who knows, but that he will not actually raise that this morning. But the crucial difference is sticking to the idea of crowdsourcing, but fewer subjects. So in the first Prime Minister's Questions of the new Jeremy Corbyn leadership, we all sat here, he went through subject after subject after subject and didn't get very far. Today he's narrowing it down, and that will be a big
Laura,
difference.
I've just been told it's already started. Let's go straight to the question.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to echo the Prime Minister's tributes to the two RAF airmen killed in Afghanistan, Flight Lieutenant Geraint Roberts and Alan Scott, and also sadness at the death of David Phillips in the line of duty, as many police officers do face danger. I absolutely concur with his remarks about that. I'm sure he and the whole House would also join me in expressing sympathies and sadness at the more than 100 people that died of a bomb blast in Ankara last Sunday, attending a peace rally of all things, and our sympathies must go to all of them. I want to ask the Prime Minister a question about tax credits. I've had 2,000 people email me in the last 3 days offering a question to the Prime Minister on tax credits. I'll choose just one. Kelly writes, I'm a single mum to a disabled child. I work 40.5 hours each week in a job that I trained for. I get paid £7.20 per hour. So in April, the Prime Minister is not putting my wage up, but he'll be taking tax credits off me. So my question is, can the Prime Minister tell us how much worse off Kelly will be next year?
Well, first of all, let me welcome what the Honourable Gentleman has said and join him in what he said about the terrible bomb that took place in Ankara, where over 100 people were killed. And our thoughts should be with those families of those that suffered, and also with that country as it struggles against this terrorism. Let me answer very directly on the issue of tax credits. What we're doing is bringing in the national living wage, which will be a £20 a week pay rise for people next year. Obviously, Kelly will benefit as that national living wage rises to £9. Hold on. Sorry, what happened to the new approach? I thought we were questions asked so that they could be responded to. Right, so there's the introduction of the national living wage, which will reach £9 by the end of the Parliament, which will benefit Kelly. Also, in April next year, we raise to £11,000 the amount of money that you can earn before you start paying taxes. And also, Kelly, if she has children, will be benefiting from the 30 hours of childcare that we're bringing in. In addition to that, there's also the point that if Kelly, and I don't know all her circumstances, but if she's a council house or housing association tenant, we're cutting her rents. All those things are important, as is the increase in employment and the increase in wages taking place today.
I thank the Prime Minister for that. Can I tell him, in case he's not aware of it, that she's going to be £1,800 a year worse off next April? And that there are another 3 million families in this country who will also be worse off next April, and that after housing costs, 500,000 more children are now in poverty compared with 5 years ago in 2010. And on top of that, his new tax credit policy will put another 200,000 children into poverty. Isn't the truth of the matter that this government is taking away the opportunities and limiting the life chances of hundreds of thousands of children from poorer or middle-income families in this society? And should he not be aware of that in the decisions he makes?
Well, the fact is that since I became Prime Minister, there are 480,000 fewer children in households where nobody works. There are 2 million more people in work. There are almost 1 million more women in work. There are 250,000 more young people in work. The best route out of poverty is to help people get a job. And that's why, even though the unemployment figures came out today and we see 140,000 more people in work, he still hasn't welcomed the fall in unemployment that took place today. But the point he needs to focus on is this, is that all these people benefit from a growing economy where wages are rising, where inflation is falling, and where we're getting rid of our deficit to create economic stability. And it's that stability that we'll be voting on in the lobbies tonight.
The Prime Minister is doing his best, and I admire that, but could he not tell us something else? That the reality is people in work often do rely on tax credits to make ends meet. His party and himself have put forward a budget which cuts tax credits, gives tax breaks to the very wealthiest in our society. So inequality is getting worse, not better. Should he not think for a moment about the choices that he's making and the reality it is for the very poorest people in our society?
Well, the honourable gentleman talks about the reform of tax credits, and let me tell him why it is necessary. Between 1998 and 2010, the bill for tax credits went from 6 billion to 30 billion, and yet at the same time, in-work poverty went up by 20%. The system of taking money away from people and giving it back to them in tax credits wasn't working. We say it's better to let people earn more and then take less from them in taxes. And what we have in this country is 2 million more people in work. Now, the figures he quotes for inequality are simply wrong. There are 800,000 fewer people in relative poverty than 2010. There are 300,000 fewer children in relative poverty in 2010. And if he wants to know why, it's because we took difficult decisions to get our deficit down, get our economy growing, and deliver the strongest growth anywhere in the Western world. Now, tonight, the Labour Party has a choice. A week ago, they were committed to getting the deficit down and running a surplus just like us. But for some reason, I know not why, they've decided to do a 180-degree turn and vote for more borrowing forever. Is that now the position of the Labour Party?
Corbyn! The reality is that 3 million low and middle-income families are going to be worse off as a result of the tax credit changes. And if the Prime Minister wants to change his mind on tax credits, he's very welcome to do that. There'll be an opportunity next week when there's going to be an Opposition Day debate on this very subject. And I'm sure the Prime Minister will want to take part in that debate and explain why it's such a good idea to make so many people so much worse off. I'd also like to tell him I've had 3,500 questions on housing in the last few days. And I just want to say this. A question from Matthew. This might be funny to some members, but it's not funny to Matthew or many others. Matthew says, I live in a private rented house in London with 3 other people. Despite earning a salary well over the median wage, buying even the cheapest of properties is well beyond my reach for years to come. Does the Prime Minister think it's fair that and does he really believe that £450,000 is actually an affordable price for a new home for somebody on an average income to try and aspire to?
First of all, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to raise the issue of housing, particularly the affordability of housing in London. And what I would say to Matthew is that we are doing everything we can to get councils to build more houses, particularly affordable houses that he can buy. Now, the honourable gentleman quotes the figure of £450,000 because what we're saying is that should be the upper limit for a starter home in London. We want to see starter homes in London built at £150,000, at £200,000, so that people like Matthew can stop renting and start buying. Now, what have we done for people like Matthew? Well, obviously, we've introduced Help to Buy. So for the first time, we're actually helping to get people their deposit together so they can buy a new home. We're also giving people like Matthew the right to buy the housing association home. And we've now got, well, That's interesting. We hear groans from the Labour Party, but of course the entire housing association movement is now backing our plan and saying people should be able to buy their home. So I would say to the honourable gentleman, let us work together and get London building to get prices down so people like Matthew can afford to buy a home of their own.
Could I bring the Prime Minister back to reality? The last 5 years have seen a low level of house building, less than half the new buildings that are actually needed. It's seen rapidly rising rents, rising homelessness, therefore also a higher housing benefit bill, and even the CBI, his friends at the CBI, say we need to be building at least 240,000 homes per year. Will he now address the problem that local authorities face in accessing funds in order to undertake the necessary and essential building of council housing, rather than what appears to be a growing obsession in the government to selling off publicly owned properties rather than building homes for people that desperately need them so that children can grow up in a safe, secure environment, which is what we all want for all of our children?
Well, let me deal with all his points in turn. Of course, first of all, now that the Housing Association movement is backing the right to buy, that will mean up to 1 million extra homeowners, with that money going back into building more homes. That's the first point. The second point on council housing. In the last 5 years, when I was Prime Minister, we built more council homes than the last Labour government built in 13 years. But the most important point, that's a bit of reality for the honourable gentleman, he might want to digest, but the most important point is this: if we want to build homes, we need a strong and stable economy. We're not going to have a strong and stable economy if we adopt the new Labour position, which is borrowing money forever. So I would urge members opposite who believe in a strong economy, paying down our deficit, making sure we deliver for working people, to join us in the lobbies tonight.
It would be very nice if the Prime Minister actually answered the question I asked. Which...
Order. These proceedings should be conducted in a seemly way, and chuntering from a sedentary position from either front bench is not helpful. Remain calm. Be as good as you can be. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm totally calm, I assure you, and I don't intend to engage in any chuntering. I just put the question to the Prime Minister that I actually put to him was, what is he doing to allow local authorities to build the homes that are necessary for people who have no opportunity to buy and can't afford to remain in the private rented sector? I realise this might be complicated. I'd be very happy if he wrote to me about it, and we can then share the letter with others. But I want to turn my last question to one other subject. I realise he may not be able to give me the full answer today, and he may wish to write to me about it. I'm sure he's aware that yesterday was Secondary Breast Cancer Awareness Day. In Brighton last month, I met two women, Frances and Emma, who are suffering from terminal breast cancer. And apparently the Prime Minister met their organisation in 2010, and they raised with him a very serious problem of the collection of data in all hospitals across this country about the incidence of secondary breast cancer, the treatment of it, and the success or otherwise rates of the treatment that goes on. Apparently, this information is not being collected as efficiently as it might be. It is not being centralised sufficiently as I understand it. And I'd be grateful if the Prime Minister could follow up on the promise he made to these women in 2010 that this data is going to be collected, is going to be centralised, so that we can ensure that every woman who's going through the trauma of not just breast cancer but secondary breast cancer, knowing that it's terminal, but knowing there may be some treatment that can alleviate the pain and possibly extend their lives. Will he undertake to do that and reply to me as soon as possible?
No, I think the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to raise this, and indeed I met with the very campaigners. I think he met with at his conference, I met them at my conference and had a good discussion with them, because look, we all know people who've had the tragedy of having breast cancer, and one can only imagine what it must be like to recover and survive breast cancer in a primary sense, but then to find out you have a secondary cancer, often a secondary cancer that's completely incurable. What the campaigners are asking for is better information, not least because they want to make sure we're spreading the best practice in every hospital so that we really do treat people as quickly as we possibly can. So I had a conversation with them. I relayed that to the Health Secretary. I'm very happy to write to him about it, but making sure people get the right diagnosis, they get it quickly, and then we use the information to tackle secondary breast cancer is absolutely essential for our country.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister help clear something up for the House and the country? And it concerns the recent biography of him by Isabel Oakeshott. In it, Lord Ashcroft says that he told the Prime Minister in 2009 about his non-dom tax status, and yet in 2010 the Prime Minister said he didn't know the detail of Lord Ashcroft's tax status. Clearly someone's telling porkies. Is it him or Lord Ashcroft?
I think what I'd say to the honourable gentleman is I would think of many better uses of his time than reading that book. I managed to procure a free copy, and in order not to give anyone royalties, I'll gladly lend him a copy if that's what he'd like. I think he'll remember that in this House, Labour and Conservative agreed to legislate so that non-doms could not sit in either House. Legislation I fully supported, indeed suggested at the time.
Thank you. Order. Yes, point of order, Caroline Lucas.
Prime Minister's questions comes to an end. They're overran a little bit. The Speaker there complaining that the questions were too long, and maybe some of the answers were a bit long too, since he cut the Prime Minister off in his prime at one stage. That will improve relations between the Speaker and 10 Downing Street. No end at all. This was Mr Corbyn's second outing as Labour leader for PMQs, and he stuck to the formula first time out of choosing emails that was sent in. Though this time he chose only 2 subjects and then used his own follow-ups to the questions, which I think in many ways was more effective because he could drill down on some of the issues that are raised. He went, first of all, on tax credits, raising the case of a single mother, on £7.20 an hour, how much worse off should we be? And then he raised the issue of someone living in London, earning more than the median wage, he said, but still couldn't afford to buy a house in London. It was all pretty civilised, factually based, and so the Prime Minister took it out on Angus Robertson, the SNP leader in the House of Commons. It seems that that's the way he'll kind of work off his spare energy, since both Mr Corbyn and Mr Cameron so far have decided to be nice to each other. What were our viewers moving on?
Lots of response on the issue of tax credits. So this from Morwyn Dobbs. Jeremy Corbyn's opening question was excellent. Mr Cameron chooses to be blind to the indication that some people will lose out on the loss of tax credits. The Prime Minister should apologise and have a change of heart. This from David Hartman. The change is about moving away from a high-wage economy and low-tax economy, from this unsustainable low-wage, high-benefit economy created by Labour. Working tax credits are simply importing Labour voters to replace those that do not trust Labour anymore. And then on the style of PMQs in the Brave New World, Mark Gorecki said Jeremy Corbyn is out of his depth. And Richard Barnes says, I don't think David Cameron can deal with calm, straightforward, unglamorous, straight-talking Corbyn. PMQs is interesting and serious again.
Very well. It'll never catch on.
Doesn't say that there.
No, I know that. Laura, what did you make of it?
I think compared to the first outing, you know, Jeremy Corbyn had he'd had his Lucozade this morning. You know, he was a bit more focused. The strategy was certainly more effective.
Other energy drinks are available.
Oh yeah, of course. Something that comes in an orange bottle that we would cover up the label. But I think it was a more effective strategy to reduce the number of subjects and then have space for his own follow-ups. I think what was interesting, though, we did actually see, even in this new politics, a few little jibes from Jeremy Corbyn towards David Cameron. He said, I know the Prime Minister's doing his best at one point. He asked to bring him back to reality. You know, there were just a couple of little signs there that Jeremy Corbyn might potentially one day actually develop a bit of a taste for some of the punch bag politics that we're much more used to seeing at Prime Minister's questions. Much more effective, certainly, but did it really put the Prime Minister under very much pressure? Not really yet.
I mean, using specific examples to illustrate policies or policy problems is an interesting way forward, and it engages people. The problem is, though, that we're dealing in the dark. We don't know the single mother, Kelly, I think was her name.
Indeed.
We don't know all her estate situation.
We don't know, and we also don't...
And Matthew, who couldn't get a house, we don't know his situation either.
We don't, and we don't also know at this stage what Team Corbyn is doing to sort of verify and check in these undoubtedly large numbers of people who are emailing in their concerns. And the danger also, when you've got a bit of it there, is what you end up with, not a particularly helpful or illuminating trade-off over statistics. As you say, the sort of individual case study, people's stories can be very evocative, and we've seen that in politics over many, many times. Often it's one individual story that really brings an issue to life. But when it's done in that particular environment, a trade-off over stats doesn't necessarily move the arguments on
And the
very
person
much.
whose first name we only know and whose details, I mean, they probably don't want all the details to be known.
And I'm sure as last time on the first outing, of course, within half an hour, Marie, I think who sent in the origin of the first question that Jeremy Corbyn asked on his first outing, Marie was appearing on radio phone-ins, and we were talking to her about what she really thought of things. So we'll see today if Kelly and Matthew end up on the airwaves somewhere later on.
But regardless, David Gauke, of the actual details, what the Kelly example shows is at the very least the potential for somebody to be worse off as a result of your changes.
But I come back to the point that I was making earlier, that this is an environment where we are increasing the national minimum, bringing in the national living wage. And there's an important point to be made about this, that this will have a ripple effect. It won't just be those people who are earning below £7.20 an hour who are likely to be affected. This is likely to have an effect on people who are earning more than that.
We were told she was on £7.20 an hour. She's a single mum. She's doing 40 hours a week, we were told as well. She's probably on the outer limit of what you could do if you're a single mother. It'd be pretty hard to be a single mum and do more than 40 hours a week. Indeed, many single mothers would be on less than that. Such are the difficulties and the amount of work it takes to bring up a kid as a single mum. And she doesn't, already being on what the minimum wage is going to in April, she's not really helped.
Well, no, that's my point, is that it's not just those who are below what the national living wage will be who will benefit. There will be ripple effects as wage differentials will apply. And we're seeing at the moment that the wages are growing quite strongly. We saw the numbers this morning about 3% increase. So we have to look at this as a package. So we've got the national living wage, we've got those additional hours of free childcare, which may be very relevant in this case. Again, same position.
She'll need a pretty big pay rise to counteract for what Mr. Corbyn claimed would be being £1,800 worse off.
We're also seeing the personal allowance increase. So it has to be looked at across the board in terms of what is going to be the impact. But I also come back to this point, if we don't address the public finances, we did fight the last election saying we would find £12 billion from the welfare budget, and if we don't find it from there, what are we going to do? Borrow more or take it from
the Prime Minister
departments?
managed to mention 5 times his fiscal responsibility charter and challenging Labour what to do with. I think if we'd asked him about whether there was life on Mars, he would have managed to work in the fiscal responsibility charter in his response. It's Labour's policy not to make these tax credit cuts, correct?
Yes.
Right. Now that's 4.4 billion that the government says it will save by doing these cuts, whether one agrees or not with the cuts. Now you're pledged to balance the current budget, which is what this 4.4 billion comes from. So where would you make that up?
Well, it's about the choices that we make. We know that the government have chosen to cut inheritance tax, which affects those on the very highest incomes, whilst attacking the very people that they say they want to be on the side of. Ordinary working people who are doing what the government's asked of them, going out to work, like the example. And it doesn't matter that we don't know Kelly individually, because all of us know those constituents that we represent who are going out to work, who are on low wages, maybe on the national minimum wage, maybe just above it, and now they're going to be hit by these tax credit cuts. And you can't say that they're definitely going to be be better off? Because what if they're getting free childcare because mum's looking after their child while they're out at work? How can you promise that employers are going to increase wage differentials so that people get a rise? And the IFS have said themselves that there's nowhere near enough to compensate.
I understand. But it is your answer to my question. These are all interesting points, but that wasn't my question. The answer to my question is that you would not proceed with the cuts on inheritance tax, and that would pay for the 4.4 billion that you'd have to find to keep the tax credits?
Well, I think there's two parts to how we would respond. One is that we want an economy that's based on growth, on investment. Well, we have to continue to ensure that the economy continues to grow, and that we raise productivity, which is due to fall this year and next year and the year after.
Well, actually, productivity started to rise again. But in any case, raising productivity, which I perfectly understand, that's a long-term plan. You've got 4.4 billion to find in a short time because you're pledged to balance the current budget. So are you saying that that can all be done by the inheritance tax cut saving?
What I'm saying is that the government have to make choices about...
No, I'm asking about your choices.
Well, we're not in government.
No, but it's legitimate. No, but you're committed to balancing a current budget. So I'm asking you how you would do that, given that you'd have to find... I mean, he's prepared to do it by taking... I think we've, done the potential implications of tax credit cuts. We've had quite a good go at that. We had 3 interviews on that at the Tory conference. What I'm asking you, let's assume you're right, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't cut tax credits. How do you fill the 4.4 billion hole?
Well, there are lots of ways in which you make choices about spending and about taxation. Inheritance tax is one of those examples.
So that's one, I understand, but I don't think that would give you the 4.4 billion.
But other parts of the welfare budget that we want to look at, we know that the amount we're spending on housing benefit, on supporting people in private tenancies, is going up and up. And I've seen that in my own constituency. It would be far better to invest the money in in allowing councils to build more homes for low rents rather than money going straight into the pockets of buy-to-let.
But that, in the short run, at least, would be more spending.
Well, sometimes it's right, and this comes back to the whole point about the charter that we're discussing. Sometimes it is right to invest in productive productive things like building housing. That's going to save us more money in the long run, particularly when the cost of borrowing is incredibly low. And that's why you don't want, as a government, to tie your hands that stops you from making sensible decisions about investing in the future.
Final thought.
I think, as the Leon has nobly just tried to do, the difficulty is for MPs like her on the Labour benches, on the front benches or the back benches, it's going to be very difficult for them to answer those kinds of questions that you've just been putting until they're clear what Labour's economic policy actually is. Now, John McDonnell, after the chaos through this week, is going to be in the House of Commons this afternoon, the Shadow Chancellor, having promised to be fairly clear about what the party's economic policy is going to be, how it's going to look like. But I think this is the huge vulnerability, and this is why George Osborne, frankly, is rubbing his hands with glee at the opportunity to put this vote this afternoon and the difficulty that it has given Labour over the last few days. And there are Labour MPs, very important to say, not just those who'd be seen as on the right of the party, who are really quite distressed about what's happened this week. Some of them having a bit of a laugh and a joke, saying they're going to be washing their hair tonight rather than turning up to the vote. But this is serious because it talks to exactly the strategic problem that Labour had in the last Parliament too, economic credibility.
So George Osborne speaks this afternoon and John McDonnell speaks this afternoon.
Indeed.
That would be worth that.
It certainly will be.
Get
the first
popcorn
big
out.
face-off, really, between the two men.
Good. Thank you, Laura.